So I think we're 8 minutes past the hour. Why don't we get started? And I'm recording folks that are joining. We right now have a total of 11 folks. We have 4 board members, and the rest are, I think it's Minded Fox, Lisa Skirch, Tycraft, Chelsea, Mario, Thomas, and there's someone on an iPhone. So welcome everyone. Elizabeth will just embellish on the topic in a minute. I just want to set some ground rules. We're here for about 90 minutes. Thank you for joining. We are going to keep everybody on mute with the exception of a few board members. We'll encourage you at every slide. We've got about 8 topics. At every slide juncture, we'll be asking you to poll a question and send a question, and we'll attempt to answer it. Besides that, I'm trying to see if we can get a poll, sort of just getting a general poll from you on 1 or 2 questions. And if you can enable that, that'll be great as well. So with that, I'm going to turn this over to Elizabeth Decker.
Thank you, Terry. So I know there's been a number of webinars coming out from various organizations regarding COVID-19. One thing that we discovered as a board is that several of us have experience with putting together business continuity plans and then implementing them not only in Florida, but also around the world. So we're going to try to share some of our experiences with that. On the call today, you have Terry, who is our marketing chair and just joined or just spoke to you. Also, we have on the call Debbie Wilson, who is our Sim Women chair, and we have Jason Davis, who is our membership chair. If you would like any additional information about Sim South Florida, you can go to our website. It's simsfl.org, and we would love to have you check us out and possibly join as a member. All the information about joining and qualifications are on the website. So getting started with our presentation, and like Terry mentioned, we definitely want you to participate. We want to make this as interactive as possible, and we would love to hear your thoughts and questions. So first off, remember today is the tomorrow you worried about yesterday. So a very good quote when it comes to thinking about business continuity planning. So first of all, let's look at what we expect the key takeaways to be. We definitely encourage you to post not only questions, but also comments. We recognize that you all may have experiences and you can add to the discussion. First off, we're gonna, we do this all the time, right? We're in Florida, we have hurricanes, we do business continuity all the time. So we've got this, right? Well, let's see. So we need to, in our considerations, what are our business continuity plans? What are organizational considerations? What about communication? What about infrastructure, tools, people, facilities, physical security? And then of course, at the end, we'll continue the discussion, for a little while as long as you guys have more questions and comments to share. So the first thing, as I mentioned, our business continuity plans typically consider hurricanes. If you've been in South Florida and you really haven't been anywhere else, that's really what our biggest threat is. There's a few of us who have had to consider business continuity plans outside of Florida. So when you're looking at a more global scale, what about earthquakes? What about fires, flood, even civil unrest? And as we're dealing with right now, an epidemic or a pandemic. What our experiences have taught us that we can use parts of our current business continuity plan in any of these situations. We just have to make maybe a few small changes that will make them work for all situations. So today we're going to focus primarily on what we're dealing with right now, which involves a partial or full work at home situation. And this is really regardless of whatever geographic region that you're part of. So when we're thinking about what to put in our business continuity plan, one of the first things that we need to think about in our current situation is what percentage of our workforce is already remote And are we prepared for 100% remote work? You know, we know that we can do remote work, but do we have everything in place? That includes infrastructure, tools, and even policies. So we'll go through some of those things a little bit later, but there's, you know, policies are a big part of telling people what's appropriate in a work from home situation, what's not appropriate. There has to be a decision and escalation process. One of the things that you find when you work from home is you can't just, you know, go down the hall and ask somebody what to do. You have to have a much more defined communication process, particularly when it comes to making decisions. Safety, you have to be considerate of your employees' safety and their health. You know, if they can work from home and that keeps them safe, let's make every effort to do that. Communication, as I mentioned communication already, but you have to think about all the different ways that you can communicate. What's going to work for everybody? Do you need to do multiple means of communications? How will you handle crisis communication and day-to-day business communication? You have to consider both in this situation. I also mentioned policy before, but it's important for us to consider, you know, how we're going to behave in this new situation. It's not the usual, so we have to come up with what those new policies are. Do we need new legal agreements, particularly with our service providers? You know, in the past, maybe, you know, from a security perspective, you ensured that your service providers used your equipment. Well, maybe they can't use your equipment because they're working from home. So what are those things that you're going to have to adjust to make sure that business can continue? One of the big differences that those of us in Florida are experiencing right now is the uncertainty in the situation. Just in my own situation, in 1 week, a 5-day work week, we had a different strategy every day because things were changing that rapidly. You know, with hurricanes, we have that cone of uncertainty. And while things can still change within that cone of uncertainty, we have a range of things that we can expect. We have no expectations in this situation, so we have to be ready for any possibility.
Awesome. So for those folks, if you have if you want to pose any specific questions, but in the time frame that we have, I think we're going to have some time to consider. So I'm just going to put out in the chat, if you click on the chat icon, you'll be able to see that I posted a question. Do you have a BCP plan in place? Yes, no, or considering. We're just looking at just getting some sort of a poll going.
Great. All right, so while everybody's doing that, should we move on to the next slide? And we'll circle back. I see a lot of yeses, so that's good. And to be honest, we didn't expect that we were going to be sharing things that were completely new. Like I said, we're in Florida. Everybody pretty much has a business continuity plan. You know, it's more having that discussion of what's different and what's new in this situation that we have here. So going on to this slide, we have organizational considerations. So one of the things that we have to keep in mind is it's called a business continuity plan for a reason. We want to make sure that business continues. So in order to do that, we have to have certain organizational considerations in place. It's not just about the technology, though we all understand that the technology is often the backbone of making business work. So who are your decision makers? You may, if you have multiple locations or multiple functions, you may have to designate decision makers for each location, for each function. You need to determine a meeting cadence with those decision makers. You all need to stay on the same page. If you're not staying on the same page, you're going to give mixed information to your stakeholders, and that's going to be a problem. You also need to have an owner or a chairperson who leads the meetings, drafts the meeting minutes, is kind of that, you know, keeping everybody together person. With each of those meetings, there needs to be an agenda and who needs to attend based on what's on the agenda, what is the frequency, who has what roles and what responsibilities to make sure that everything is getting done when they need to get done. When you're considering stakeholders, it's your employees, it's also your service providers. particularly if they're like a contractor that is on your location. You have to consider them just as you would an employee. So look at employees and service providers by location, by job function, who do they report to. You also need to consider your customers and suppliers. Just a note, I don't know if anyone saw the news that Amazon reported recently that they have employees in some of their warehouses who've tested positive for COVID-19. So they sent out a message to their customers, advising their customers that any packages they receive from Amazon, they need to be wiped down, they need to be handled with care. So those are the reasons why you want to consider your customers, on your suppliers, and we may get into this a little bit further down, but it's, you know, how are you going to pay them? How are you going to work with them on that? With each of those, you know, what is their priority of the role, their function? What is the timing of their work? You know, for instance, if you have an accounting team, their work is more critical at month end. Maybe your sales team has more criticality at a different point in time, but just know what that time is where their work is most critical. In some cases with your stakeholders, you may have to make choices as far as, you know, these employees are our top performers and we're going to keep them, you know, working. Whereas, you know, we may have some other employees that, hey, we just don't have enough laptops, so we're going to let them be idle for now, right? So those are all information that you need to make those decisions. You also need to consider who are your at-risk stakeholders. We've already seen an uptick in attempts and phishing attempts and things like that because they're expecting that we're going to have our guard down when it comes to security because we're dealing with these other situations. And now is not the time to let your guard down on security. So understand who your at-risk stakeholders are, those executives and financial people, anybody on the strategy that could possibly be hit by a phishing attack, right? Also, you have capital liquidity. This is whether or not your company can meet financial obligations. And that's where it goes into the suppliers. Do you need to make some decisions about what suppliers you will pay now or which ones you can postpone payment to without affecting your business? You have to consider how much money you have coming in. Many companies are going to lose customers or the customers won't be able to pay them. So you have to consider what's going on there. When you're going out, and we're going to talk later about what equipment you might need, you know, do you buy all the equipment you think you're going to need, or do you have a more cautious stance considering that you may not have money to buy all that equipment? We've already seen a number of individuals who have been laid off due to the company just not having enough money to pay their employees when they consider that they're not going to be getting any income for the next little while. So this is, while it's not an IT concern, it is affecting us, and so we need to be aware of it. As you're going through this, don't wait till the end to do your follow-up. Continually update your business continuity plan with what you learn. Ensure your risk issues, actions, and decisions are logged, monitored, and as I mentioned, continuously followed up on. You need to, if you find something that's not working, you need to be changing it rapidly so that you can keep up with it. So I see that there's a few comments. Terry, anything that you want to add?
Yeah, I think one of the considerations, yeah, is the joint ownership. Is it just IT taking ownership for their own people, or is it a combined enterprise question that's been addressed by the management team? And I think there's a big distinction there, because just having separate plans is really a challenge, but having a combined organizational people issue, or at least understanding that the consequences of what we're facing from a crisis are addressed across the board. So holistically and collectively making sure that decisions are enterprise level and not just affecting a particular function.
Yeah. And that's why, you know, as we noted at the beginning, you do have your decision makers at each function, but they all have to roll up to one chairperson that's kind of coordinating the whole thing, so that we're giving all of our stakeholders the same message and we're coordinated in how we're behaving as a company.
Correct. I think Elizabeth, Jason was looking at chiming in as well.
All right.
Yeah. Yeah, one of the things I just wanted to reiterate, I mean, you made a point about it as you interact with your stakeholders and your partners, right? Whether they be suppliers or perhaps third-party providers that you engage with. I think you mentioned the fact that, you know, you do need to consider them as you would your own employees from a health perspective and that type of thing. I think the other thing that we've found is, you know, particularly if they are truly partners, it requires a level of interaction and a level of mutual communication, you know, at the senior levels with the leadership for that company, because those employees, particularly from a service provider, you know, they're going to have the health and welfare and concern and all of these things that we're talking about with respect to our company. They have the same kind of considerations and challenges, you know, uncharted territory, et cetera, within their firm, right? And so I think good integration from a leadership perspective and setting some expectations and kind of mutual recognition of those challenges is important, right? Because then you're working on it together as opposed to, you know, doing it in a vacuum and saying, well, this is going to be our policy for company X, right? I think you do have to do that in partnership with some of your key providers.
Definitely.
And I think
I'll talk about some of that. I think there's another slide where we talk about whether or not you have to renegotiate some of your agreements to make sure that both you and your suppliers are able to manage through this situation.
Yeah, and I think one of the key considerations here is people want to feel like they're being communicated to, but more importantly, they want to see transparency. So the more the organization can show that they care about the people aspects as opposed to just reacting to the market and the health demands, but really being transparent about what's going on, etc. And to that point, I put a poll question out there: is do you have an organization plan? Is it for yesterday? Is it for today and for the future? If you can just give us some comments on that, that would be great.
So do we want to move on to the next slide while we wait for those answers to come in?
Yep.
All right, so we talked a little about communication already, but we're going to talk about it some more, and that's because communication is critical. First of all, make sure you have centralized communications. We have so many solutions that are available to us from, you know, just if you have an intranet that your company has set up in whatever platform. We also have Google Group, SharePoint, Teams, or any other collaboration tool. Make use of them now. One of the things that we're doing on our team at my company is every morning we're supposed to log on and say good morning to everyone. We missed it for a few days and somebody said, hey, I missed getting the good morning. Let's, you know, keep this going. So, you know, even something as simple as that is saying good morning and trying to keep some of your same routines down is important. But it's also important from the perspective of, you know, when people have questions, do they have a place that they can go to either find the question or ask the question? And I think we do definitely need to have a centralized communication place where everybody goes. And again, it's about making sure everybody has the same information. Do have a cadence. If you want to have, you know, regular meetings or whatever the situation might be, make sure that that's a regular situation. You don't, you know, leave a long spell of nothing and no information for people. So it could be, you know, you may have to have a meeting just with your executives. You may have to have a general meeting with all of your employees, and then also consider having meetings or communications with your external customers, suppliers, whatever. You have to make sure that the public relations are kept up. A number of our suppliers, I've noticed, have put out statements about what they can and cannot do during this time, and that's really critical for those of us that depend on them to have that information. So if you're in that position where you're providing services, make sure you're communicating to your customers, make sure you're maintaining those public relations. You could do blast communications, text, email, personal email, podcasts like we're doing today with this webinar, phone call with a recording. Some companies do that with hurricanes, right? Where there's a phone call or a phone number that you can call in and just say, and the recorded message just says, hey, our office is still closed or our office is open for a hurricane. Why not do the same thing in this situation, right? Make sure you have the contact information, that it's up to date for all of your employees, for any service providers or anyone that you need to get in touch with. Again, ownership is important. It's good to have your communication come from your senior leadership. It establishes trust and integrity. Also, and Terry, I may ask you to speak a little bit more about this, but using a passive voice. Over communicate it, say it, tell them why you say it, repeat, confirm, repeat. So Terry, you want to add more to that?
Sure. I'm fortunate to be part of an organization where transparency is front and center. So communication is paramount to our success. So both from our client's perspective as well as the service that we provide in the industry, the CEO is front and center. And I can't tell you how many meetings there are in a given week, or seminars, or even recordings that are coming out on a daily basis. But guess what? The content is fresh, it's relevant, and it's also consistent. And it's rinse and repeat. But it's sort of saying, we hear you, we know you as the we know what you're dealing with from a personal level, from a professional level, and from a market perspective. And also sharing some of the bad news as well as the good news. I think that's critical, because by being front and center, by being transparent and actually sharing the key clear messages, and it's not just giving you the stuff that you want to hear, but it's talking about, we have a plan in place, we've got your interests at heart, we're struggling with clients, with etc., and everybody's dealing with it, but it's bringing us all down to the common level. And I think this is the time of crisis where we're feeling that, and it's authentic. And I think that's an important thing. It's authentic as well as everything is transparent. No secrets.
Yeah, I wanted to chime in just real quick. I think one of the things you pointed out, I think bears repeating, right? It's also that communication to be authentic and meaningful to each person as individuals needs to include, well, obviously if it's truly the case, but it needs to include the fact that your health and welfare and the health and welfare of your families are paramount, right? And so I think that's a key part of something like this that really, underscores for people just where the priorities are for a corporation. I saw an interesting article today, actually, where Mark Cuban was interviewed, and he made a statement that, the actions that companies take today in the wake of COVID-19 are going to define their brand for years to come. And I think it's a very true observation, because whether you're talking about as an employer or as a consumer, how companies react during these times are going to set people's perceptions and will set that brand for years to come. I think he's right.
Yeah, and to that point, Jason, you reminded me of something I saw yesterday. Was I think it was the CEO of Salesforce, and he pledged to CEOs for 90 days, don't lay your people off. And I think that kind of sentiment, sending that message, is saying you have other options. Go into the thinking mode. Start to think about the consequences of what you're doing, because the ramp up when things improve is going to hurt you in the long run. So if you're just going to do knee-jerk reactions, you're just going to react to your bottom line, etc. You've got to be, and I think putting messages out like that makes people start to think about just the message that they're sending. And I think the communication has to be clear, but at the same time, there's got to be some thought behind those messages as well.
Yep.
Just before we move on, I don't know if anybody wanted to chime in. Debbie, any comments on that? I think Just one question on that, on communications. I polled it out there. Is communication centric or coordinated for you, or is it distributed? In other words, is it managed by different people? Let me just, I had a spell mistake in there. So we'll move on to the next piece. Apologies. Okay.
All right, so there's a lot to talk about on this slide. So I may take interim breaks as we go through it. With infrastructure and tool considerations, that is hitting us hard as we're trying to do a remote workforce, because there is a lot to consider. First of all, thinking about your applications. Some businesses are completely in the web, which is great, but other businesses have to consider, hey, we have some on-premise applications, and how are people going to get access to them? Hopefully you already have a VPN set up. Is your VPN ready to handle everybody? And I think that's where some of us are running into challenges, because we planned VPN for a few people to work from home on occasion, not for everybody working from home. So we have to look at whether or not the VPN can scale. Do you need any additional hardware or software to be able to increase your bandwidth? What about prioritization? Are there some applications that are really not business critical, and you need to scale them back, maybe make them not available on the VPN so that the other critical applications are available on the VPN? Are there other ways to access your applications? Perhaps for security reasons, you put something on the VPN, but maybe it can be accessible outside of the VPN, and you just have to check the security measures of that particular application. We mentioned Salesforce, so let's use that example. Are you comfortable with the security that Salesforce has built in, and can you give your users direct access to that without going through the VPN, as an example? So those are all considerations that you need to take into account, because like I said, for the most part, many of us considered a partial workforce working from home, not 100%. So now what do we got to do to make it 100%? The other thing to consider, even if you're not on-premise and you're 100% in the cloud, the company that I currently work for is 100% in the cloud. What we're seeing and what other companies are seeing is that our public networks are taxed. They are struggling to keep up with the demand, and so there's a number of considerations around that. It's not just once you get outside of your home, whether or not you have enough bandwidth, but do you have enough bandwidth inside your home? Because it's not just your employee who's working from home, but their kids are home, their spouses are home. What's going on? Are people online gaming? Are they doing Netflix? And that's not your employee, that's family members most likely. Plus trying to do video calls, webinars such as this one. If you think about all the things that are now happening within a home, and then now it's also how many millions of homes going through our public networks. It's a consideration that you have to look at. What if somebody wants to work from a Starbucks? What are your considerations there? It's, one is of course the health concern. Should they really be at a Starbucks, considering the situation that we're dealing with? But also, is that network safe? Do they know how to make sure that they're connecting to the right network and they're not going to be caught with a man-in-the-middle type attack? How are you communicating those requirements to people and setting policies about what they can do when they're on a public network? Any thoughts or additional comments on that?
How about, do you have a good enough inventory of applications? Because some folks get caught with just adding to their portfolio of solutions, and really it's at times like this where you suddenly realize we haven't even got any control. That may be something that is almost resetting the button around, do we not even know what we're dealing with? So I don't know if anybody's experienced that, but that's definitely a consideration. It means you have to almost do an inventory up front. I know it sounds very basic, but it's happened. We had the blackout, we had September 11th, we had crashes in Wall Street that this was common. We just didn't know what we had.
Yeah. And, you know, even if you didn't do it beforehand, like they say, there's no time like the present. You know, you don't want to be making decisions without all of the information. And yes, we do have to make decisions quickly. At the same time, you know, try to get as much information as you can about what applications you have available, who's using them, and so that you can make those decisions about what's critical, what you already have. You don't want to be going out and buying licenses, particularly as we mentioned before, we're going to be in financial straits. So don't go out and buy applications before you look at what you already have and determine whether or not you have something that will do what you need it to do. All right. So moving on to the next column we have here, issues and risks. This is something that I know we talked about it at my company, but also I'm sure you guys talked about it at other companies. One is, okay, we have all these remote users. They're not all IT people. Do they know how to set up a remote, you know, set up their computer at home? How are we going to support them? If they call into the help desk, how are we going to help them do what they need to do? Is your help desk team, you know, are they experienced enough that they can walk somebody through how to do something on the phone? They may, you know, if the computer's not set up yet, they can't remote into the computer, so they're going to have to talk them through it on the phone. One of the reasons I emphasize that is we made the decision that it would be a liability for us to send our help desk techs to someone's home, because we couldn't be sure that there wasn't somebody in that home that had COVID-19, and we couldn't put our employees in that position. So everything has to be done over the phone, or if they do have the computer set up, they can remote into the computer and help them that way. So, you know, do you need to do extra training for your help desk support so that they can do that online and phone training? You also may consider that you have to do extra training for your employees. One of the things that we did, as we had made the decision that our employees that don't normally have a home setup, that they could take their equipment from the office and take it home. So before they took it from the office, we did a little training on them of how to set up a computer when they got it home. So you have to consider all of those. They seem like little things, but when you have somebody at home and they don't know what to do, it becomes a little bit more challenging. Make sure you're communicating to the employees who are working from home how to address competing bandwidth within their home. We've already talked about all the different things that can go on. If they're having trouble, they may have to ask other family members to stop streaming Netflix or things like that. Just help them understand what they need to do to be most effective at home. Do make sure that you have the right remote desktop tools. You know, if you don't have a team viewer or something like that, you know, how are you going to help people remotely? Are you going to have to do everything through the phone? It may be worth that, you know, we talked about what licenses you may need to buy. Well, if you don't have a license for doing remote help desk support, that may be one you want to invest in. So those are all considerations that you have. Terry or anyone else, you have any thoughts on issues and risks to consider?
No, I think in terms of, without talking about the communications, it's probably prudent to see is how is that being communicated? Is it through chatbots? Is it through email predominantly? Or is it on a group text, etc.? Just, you know, what is the thing that makes the most sense is to react and be responsive immediately, because I think continuity is important, right? So if people don't have their issues resolved, it slows down the productivity. It also creates this sense of I can't keep doing my job, etc. And the last thing we want is to see a slowdown. You know?
Yeah. So one thought that I just had that's, you know, happening currently at my company is we have a system that if somebody logs in and doesn't put it in multi-user mode, no one else can log in. It wasn't a problem when everybody was in the office because, you know, they all sat together and they would just yell out, hey, you know, you've got it in single user mode, get out. Now that they're all remote, it's a lot more difficult for them to determine who locked the system. So one of my tasks this afternoon is go through everybody's computer and make sure they do not have the ability to lock the system in single user mode. That's, just like I said, some of these little things, if you don't address them, can become a hindrance for people being productive. So if somebody can't get into a system for an hour, that's an hour lost of productivity. So even though they're little, you have to consider them and have to think about how people are going to work differently when they're not next to each other. Right.
And it's also a time of rationalizing what is too onerous, what is too complex, and what doesn't support our general expediency opportunity. Yeah. And so, for example, a lot of the legacy tools like ServiceNow, etc., they've got a lot of, maybe there's too much data that we're tracking to solve a basic issue. Maybe it's too complex, etc. So it's a time to actually also rationalize and say, do we need all this data to be tracked? Can we just get an issue, action, resolution process going, etc.? And sometimes, sometimes we spend too much time tracking too much data, and at the end of the day, it might be prudent to sit back and look at it and say, okay, we can simplify this, we can streamline it.
Yeah, because when things are good, it's easy to, say, hey, this is great, let's do all these wonderful things. But, when we're struggling, I agree. It's time to look at what is the simplest way to get it done so that we can get through the challenges and move forward. So on to our next section here, thinking about the hardware and devices that you're going to need. And I had mentioned earlier that you do have financial considerations. At the same time, if you don't have everything you need, how are you going to find that balance? So do take a look at what your hardware and device inventory is. Do you have anything in stock that you could possibly use rather than going out and buying something? Also consider whether or not you're going to allow your employees to use their own devices. If they have a cell phone, are you going to compensate them for the extra data that they're going to use? One nice thing is I just got a message from Verizon that they're giving me some extra data this month. That's great. That's going to help me out a lot. But are all the companies doing that? And do you need to provide some compensation to your employees if they're using their personal devices, whether it be laptops or other things? There's one employee that we had that was going to be in a different state for spring break and was trying to figure out how he was going to work from there. And the solution might be that he goes to Best Buy and buys what he needs and we reimburse him for it. The other thing, when it comes to, we talk about communication. Well, people need to be able to communicate. We already mentioned cell phones and whether or not we're going to compensate for them. One thing that has been mentioned is soft phones, where you can literally unplug the phone from the office and come into your home and plug it in. It's great if you already have it in place. But if you have not already put it in place, it's a little bit challenging to set up. Plus, you have to buy the equipment, and this now may not be the best time to start buying that. One thing that we found is we were already in progress of implementing or trying out the Teams phones. So we thought, great, we'll just take our Teams phones home. Well, it turns out that we need an additional adapter. We need additional things to make it work. So this is one area where I would caution people, if you're not already using soft phones, if you don't already have them set up, know how they work, I wouldn't start that now. Like I said, number one, equipment, you have to buy it. The other thing, and I don't know if we mentioned it already, you're probably all seeing it, is there is a severe delay in getting equipment. Since this hit China first, where a lot of the parts and things that we need for our equipment is coming from, that was already starting to delay it. And now with people here in the US and other places being out of the office, it exasperates it even more. Plus there's just everybody's trying to buy it right now. So you kind of get the idea that you can't always rely on just going out and buying equipment. The other part is video sharing, which is what we're doing right now, right? So what collaboration tools do you already have in place? How are you going to leverage them? Do you need to buy more licenses? You may have some companies that decided, hey, we only need Zoom licenses for 50% of our workforce because that's how many will actually use video calling. Well, now that everybody's remote, are you going to need it for 100% of your workforce? The other thing that I've been seeing is that as more conferences and things like this move online, if you need additional services, let's say from WebEx, you want to have a moderated call, you can't get a moderator until April, or no, I'm sorry, till May. They are booked out till May because everybody is trying to do it. So you have to consider these things in what you're planning on doing, what you need to do, and take into account the delays and things like that that you're going to see. Any other thoughts? Right.
I'm curious to ask and see if how many people are actually upgrading their monitors and getting additional, because I've been using a laptop up to now and I feel it's sufficient, but then I'm seeing colleagues with 2, 3, 4 monitors across their desk, and it's kind of interesting. You know, how much screen space do you really need, especially when you're you're sitting in front of it 10 to 12 hours a day. Do you need that much screen space? Because it's burning holes in your eyes possibly.
So I know from some of the employees that we have on our team, they do a lot with 2 monitors because, you know, they're working between 2 systems, right? So it's good to have one system up on one monitor and the other up on another monitor. So for those employees, yes, absolutely. You know, we want to make sure that they have 2 monitors at home so they can be as productive as possible, which is why we were letting people actually take some of their equipment home to make sure that that would work. So I think you know, I don't know if anyone else has any thoughts on that, but that's what I found is it really depends on, you know, what your function is. And if you have a need for 2 monitors, you know, it's best if you can manage that at home as well so that you're as productive as possible.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think it goes back to, you know, one of your first slides, Elizabeth, when you talked about the need to examine, you know, kind of policy and stuff like that, right? Because these, you know, you gotta consider, you know, it might not always be one size fits all, right, in terms of that. So I think it's fine to, you know, have a policy or think about a policy, but when push comes to shove in situations like that, you really do have to look at it on a case-by-case basis. And so that goes back to the whole organization, decision-making, you know, having a level head, thinking about what the priorities are and so forth, right? That's where leaders, you know, really, you know, come through when they can make, you know, the right kind of judgments.
Yeah, it's on a case-by-case basis, because what you have is some old school folks who are still using only the flip phone, right? So they're so used to having
exactly
a conversation, and now what you're doing is you're having to bridge that gap now to share your desktop, to collaborate more cohesively, and actually have some more of that visual. So, you know, and that's a cultural change as well. So in that consideration, it's having to, you know, what sort of training supports that, and that's probably one of the big considerations in addition to policy that has to be embraced. And just even if it's just a couple of instructions or a few help, you know, self-service help facilities, like just a help video that just walks you through it, or even someone that can support from the help desk, you know.
So it looks like Sheila, our secretary for the board, has joined. Sheila, you want to add anything to this? Or maybe she's not on audio yet.
Topic, I think, can you guys hear me?
Oh, yep, there you are.
Hi. Not that specific topic as far as, you know, the policies at home. I think you do have to think about and look at on a case-by-case basis and what the person does. I agree with that. I think the one thing I wanted to add to this screen is also working with your external suppliers. Let's say you have vendors who do support. for you and you're running low on laptops or things like that, can they use their personal laptops, and how do you go through that with security? That, or in their contracts, or protecting your data. Those are the types of things you definitely want to reach out to the vendors as far as their hardware that they'd be using, just so you can protect your company and make sure that they're using the right protection on their laptops.
Yeah. Definitely.
Especially when it involves client data as well. So I'm just posting a question out there. Do you have any infrastructure tool issues not mentioned or risks that caught you off guard? So as we move through to the next slide, if you can just put any responses out there, that would be great.
Okay. I did notice we have Alberto who said, we were just letting everybody know, so if you didn't see it in the chat, that some newer Samsung devices, if I understand this correctly, can be used on any monitor via the Samsung DEX embed feature. So as we kind of deal with, hey, maybe some of us weren't entirely prepared for 100% work at home, being a little creative about how we can use technology to get things done, I think is a great way to look at it. So if you understand certain features of, like whether it be phones or laptops that you can leverage to make things easier for people, certainly give it a try. And I just want to say that because, I was mentioning about, hey, now's not the time to try and implement a soft phone, but it doesn't mean, no, don't try other things. It's try what you can, but just be aware of some of the challenges that you could possibly face. All right, so
I think when we're talking phones too, Elizabeth, I don't know if this was brought up earlier, but there are features on with certain providers for phones in offices where you can forward them and it'll ring on your cell phone.
Yes.
So you don't have to have a soft phone. You could actually be using your cell phone that way too.
Yeah, I know Avaya has that. I think Cisco would have it as well. But yeah, a lot of the office phones, you can set up a forwarding to your cell phone.
Awesome.
Right. So with all of this, we definitely have to consider the people. You're going to have different companies in different situations. Do you have employees who are unable to work from home? It just may be that the work that they do is not something they can do from home. Are you going to pay them or compensate them? Is there a way to accommodate an arrangement? Maybe in some cases you can. What about if they do have to go to the office, what safety considerations are you going to take into account? Are you going to maintain distance, possibly split functional resources between home and office? I spoke with a friend of mine who works for the FBI, and they have a day shift and an evening shift, and they have everybody working 1 week on, or 1 week at the office and 1 week outside of the office. So at any point in time, they only had 25% of their workforce in the office. That's one way to kind of keep people separated, but still, continue business as usual. And I'm, grateful that the FBI is still, continuing business. So those are just some ideas for those when you can't have somebody working from home. For those employees that are able to work from home, have you talked to them about whether or not they have any limits on their bandwidth from home? Just again, using myself as an example, I had no issues with bandwidth until I started working from home and trying to do video calls. And then all of a sudden I realized that I needed to upgrade my internet. So that happened rather quickly, but it may, if you have employees that are saying, hey, I have this issue, talk them through, here's what you need to do to address those issues. And it may be upgrading their bandwidth at home. We already talked about, can employees take their equipment home? If they do have a need for 2 monitors, are you going to make them go buy a new monitor, or are you just going to let them take a monitor that they have from the office because they're not going to be there anyway? And we already talked also about, if there's family at home, are they watching Netflix? Are they on, gaming? What are they doing that could possibly be reducing your productivity from a bandwidth perspective, but also from a distraction perspective? There's been a few, and I don't know if you can hear it now, but my son is in the background playing a game. So, you know, it can be distracting to have all these noises coming in from outside. I know I've had people mention that, hey, it's kind of hard because, you know, now my dog is here and my dog keeps barking every time he hears a voice he doesn't recognize. That those things can help us or make it difficult for us to continue our productivity. We've already talked about compensating employees for personal cell phone use. If that's something that they need, we need to be considerate of the fact that they're going to have additional expenses that they normally wouldn't have. Then, considering all employees, you want your employees to report to you when they have an illness so that you can keep track of incidents. I mentioned earlier the announcement from Amazon that some of their warehouse employees were tested positive. That's important to you, for you to know as an employer, so that you can communicate with those who may be impacted. Do you know your location of all your resources, including contractors? You know, like, are they in an area that's being hard hit with the COVID virus? Do you need to be more concerned about their safety? Do you have their contact information, their job function? Who do they report to? All of those things so that you can manage that communication again. Do you know who your key resources are? I think I mentioned it earlier, is that you may have to make decisions about, in order for us to keep business going, I'm going to provide equipment to this key employee and not provide equipment to someone else. So you need to know who those people are. And also alternative contact. Make sure you have multiple ways to contact people so that you can let them know what's going on and what the expectations are. Make sure your human resources are trained to deal with questions about the virus exposure or infection, so that you don't have people panicking because they don't have enough information, or they have or they have incorrect information. So you want to make sure that you take care of that. So I see a few comments coming in. Terry, you want to share with us?
Sam is noting that you know, keeping track of time today, whether you used tools in the office, now it should be web-based, and also just as importantly is the point that could be, do you have a dashboard? In other words, you remember that advert that said it's 10 a.m. do you know where your team is? Or it's 10 p.m. do you know where your children are? I think that's just as important, and it's not privacy, it's a question of privacy. It's actually making sure that you're fully conversant with people and their health, because somebody contracting it, coming into the office and not mentioning it, and that's just as important. But tracking time, I believe, is definitely, it's an important piece.
Yeah. And if you haven't, you know, for hourly employees, you know, they're used to doing tracking time. If you have project-based employees, they may be more used to having deliverables tracked, which is fine. It's just a matter of making sure you're knowing what your employees are doing, and are they able to keep up with the productivity that they had while in the office. I know with the Microsoft Office 365 suite, we have a number of reports available to us that tell us this is what your employees are doing at any period of time. It's not something that we would run unless we were requested by HR to, hey, something's up with this person, go see what's going on, right? But those tools for many products are available to you, and use them, you know, to make sure. And it's not just, I think, like Terry said, not just invading people's privacy, but making sure that our money is well spent, and that, you know, people have what they need. If there's something you're seeing where somebody's not being as productive, the first question might be is, hey, what's going on? How can we help? Assuming that they're not doing what they're supposed to do.
And I think it's also the time and the rationalization to say that we don't, if we weren't cognizant of time being worked on particular activities, then now's the time to actually sit and look back and say, what can we forecast? And the only way you're going to forecast is if you've got an accuracy of what has been spent, time has been spent last week, what's upcoming, and you can start to make better decisions around the kind of work. And then that's that whole proactive mindset that sits and says, we're going to now look at how people can be more productive, how we can continue to keep good clients, be innovative, focus on the important things that are going to keep us in employment for the foreseeable future. And that's that sort of thinking that says, we're not just going to go with old habits. We have to keep improving the way we do things. And that's that ability to look forward, predict, forecast, and do a better job at what's coming, what we're doing, etc.
Yeah, I want to add another comment that's kind of parallel to this is one of the things that we've done. We always had. I mean, we do have electronic time tracking, right? That we leverage, and we've always had a time code, if you will, for working on business continuity or disaster recovery, that type of thing. But in the last couple of weeks, we've actually spun up a special code specific to COVID-19, since it was actually very different and much more broadly encompassing than any of the BCP work that we had done previously. So inevitably, at some point, somebody's going to want to look back and say, what did this cost us in terms of effort to try to make this work, all the work from home and our response and all of that. And that's now something that we're actually tracking as people are spending time on this pandemic response. So that's another suggestion that's out there. I think the other point that I was going to make is somebody brought up the point about, you have project-based resources. What we're already seeing are legitimate delays in our project delivery, right? And rightfully so, because priorities have been shifted, to business continuity and those types of things. Or, the fact is the response, or trying to figure out how some of these teams are going to operate in 100% remote fashion, are having an impact on delivery. So what that ultimate impact is going to be, we don't know yet. But I think as part of your people considerations, you do have to recognize that this is a legitimate impact in a lot of areas. But you need to also balance that with, okay, there might have been projects and stuff that you had that were running behind or in trouble regardless of COVID-19, right? So being able to actually distinguish that in a way that you're, I think being thoughtful and fair, but don't let the pandemic response become a catch-all for why things are falling apart on projects. So I know that's probably not the most optimistic view of things, but I think it's a reality that we're all facing, to a certain extent, because it's an easy target to say, well, COVID-19 just screwed everything up, and that's why I can't meet my deliverables, right? So I think you need to ask some hard questions and do some tough investigation on, what's really having an impact and what's not.
Yeah, definitely agree. I think it could go both ways as well. So not only do you not want it to be, let's blame everything on COVID-19, but you also want to, as we talked about before, focus your efforts where you really need them. So, to your point of like, if you have a project that really isn't doing well, is that really what you need to be working on right now? So you're not going to blame it on COVID-19, but you're going to say, hey, this is not our priority. This is not something that's urgent right now, and we're putting it on hold, or we're canceling it if we're really sure that it's not going to be successful. I think now is a time to be sure that you're spending your resources and your time in the most effective place that you can. So I definitely agree with taking a close look at your projects, understanding where they are and making, thoughtful decisions about what should continue and what should not continue.
Hi,
and don't blame COVID for everything, right?
Hi, this is Sam Hoffner. If I could add to that, I see, so I used to run business continuity, emergency response, and disaster recovery for the Washington Post company and with Kaplan. These tragedies, these difficulties, these emergencies can also be a tremendous opportunity on those projects where companies are hearing about delays from all their other vendors. Figuring out ways to deliver in spite of all of the challenges that we're facing really gives companies and teams an opportunity to stand far above and apart from everyone else that these organizations are doing business with. So if you're able to take advantage of this situation and really rise above, you do an incredible service to your brand and to your organization by demonstrating that in spite of this national or global calamity, that that you're still able to deliver. And I would take that one step further to your employees. And I know this is a sensitive topic right now when so many organizations are unfortunately contemplating layoffs and staff reductions. This is a tremendous opportunity if your organization has the financial means and the liquidity to support it. This is a tremendous opportunity to find out what your employees need, not just to continue their day-to-day work activities, but perhaps in order to support their families and support themselves while we go through this. I'll give you an example of, when we had hurricanes down here in South Florida, following the storms, we had already made arrangements in advance for not just diesel to run our generators, but tanker trucks full of unleaded, so that employees who were coming into the office in spite of, or in the wake of these storms, we would give them, we would have to ration it, but we would fill up their tank, or we would do $10 and they would have a voucher and they could fill it up there. And, being able to provide food and fuel and, showers after a storm, those are things that people really needed. So obviously it's a little bit different in this pandemic situation where we're all sheltered in place, but think about what kind of opportunities there are to build a really durable loyalty among your staff, because when we get out the other side of this, and we will, they're going to remember that the organization was there for them when they needed it. And that cultivates loyalty at a time when people generally will hop jobs for a small incremental increase in compensation. So that's all I'd like to add.
Awesome. Great points.
Thank you for your comments, Sam. I agree wholeheartedly. I mean, it is a great opportunity as for any company if you're able to provide those, provide your services. You mentioned that it helps, mentioned some of the people that it helps. And I also like to say, if you're a service provider and you have other companies relying on you, the fact that you're able to continue providing those services, it's a domino effect, right? So if your company is providing services to another company, you continue providing those services, they're going to be able to continue functioning. They're also helping their employees and their customers as a result. So it's one of those things where we can really come together as a community and make a difference just by doing our jobs to the very best of our ability and taking care of those opportunities that come up. I also agree about, building loyalty with your employees. It does, we've kind of seen in the news where, like you said, people will jump jobs for another company very easily. But if they know that company is helping them out, is making a difference in their lives, they are much more likely to stay long-term, even past this current situation. So it is definitely an opportunity to make things better. So thank you for that. Any other comments or questions about people and how we're managing this from a people perspective?
I think with Sam jumping in there, there was great insight. Maybe Elizabeth, I'm just going to pose the next question and we can get to it and then open up the floor and then take a lot more of those kinds of comments, because I'm sure you folks have been bottling them up throughout. And I appreciate the fact that we were expecting a bigger turnout, but I think this is a good forum and a good size number of people to engage this kind of dialogue. So this question around people is just threw out a question there, is to feel appreciated. Are there other BCP plan activities that people can contribute to? And it's not just to keep the lights on, but forecast better for future work. And then lastly, how about the ideation, contributing good ideas? So any comments there would be much appreciated. So we'll jump to the next slide.
All right, just a quick question, and Terry, you can answer this. Are you getting a lot of background noise from me?
No.
Okay, good.
No.
There's something going on in the other side of the house. I think it involves my son and our cat, so we'll see how this goes. All right. So regarding our facilities and physical security considerations, when we're dealing with a hurricane, we have, okay, our facility considerations are, is something going to be damaged? In this case, it's more about, how are we ensuring that when people come into our office that they're not bringing COVID-19 with them? So first question, and it was kind of like some of this is repeating, but it's important. So do people need to be on site? If they do not need to be on site, do not have them come in. That just increases your risk exponentially. If you do have people that need to be on site, should you have a healthcare professional that's there taking temperatures before someone is allowed into the office? If somebody has a temperature, send them home. That's, the easiest way to deal with that. In order to ensure that somebody doesn't sneak in, should we be limiting access to one door? And should we hire additional security to make sure everyone goes through the checks? I know that seems like, well, why can't we trust people? People think, oh, I'm fine, it'll be fine, I just need to run in and get something. Well, what if you're not fine? You've just infected everybody in the office. So sometimes we have to help people do the right thing. And that could be, like I said, limiting the access to one door, hiring additional security, making sure there's someone there that's taking their temperature. What about food? Are you going to stop serving food if you have a cafeteria at your office? Are you going to stop serving food? If you do serve food, what kind of food are you going to serve? Should you have a salad bar? What about open food bar? Do you want people to really, be eating in the same place? Or do you expect people at the cafeterias to be wearing masks, nets, gloves? Not just the food workers who always should be wearing that, but also the people coming in and buying food. I know a lot of locations have it set up so that they have one table, one small table, one chair. And they've separated the tables and chairs by 6 feet. So making sure that if they have people in the office, that they're maintaining that social distancing even in the cafeteria area. If you have maintenance scheduled, should you delay it so that you don't have those additional people coming into the office? It's kind of a case-by-case basis. I know at my office, we actually have some people in there doing some maintenance, but everyone else is out of the office. So it was okay to have somebody in the office because it's just 1 or 2 people doing that maintenance. But those are the considerations you want to have. Also, if you're in a larger building, you may be sharing your air conditioning with other businesses. Have you reached out to those other businesses to make sure that you're all following the same protocols so that you're not putting each other at risk? And workspaces, should you close down meeting rooms? Lock them, make sure people aren't going in there and congregating and disregarding the social distancing rules. If you do have people in the office, are you making sure that they are not in cubicles next to each other, but maybe cubicles separated, making sure they're separated by 6 feet? And it's not mentioned here, but also consider your kitchen area. If you may not have like a cafeteria, but may have a kitchen area where people go and get things that they need. As everybody, familiar with a protocol of how to wipe down the surfaces when they're done getting their coffee or whatever it is that they're getting, so that we're not cross-contaminating anything. And I think on the staff not in the office, there's a data center piece that's blocked out. I don't know, Terry, if there's a way to correct that. But so if your staff is not in the office, during the closure, can they still get in? What if they forgot something? How are you going to manage that situation? If there's, again, sometimes, people think they're doing, hey, it's no problem, I can just go do this. If you're worried about that happening and you really don't want people in the building, should you confiscate their card, or should you turn it off for the time being just to make sure that nobody's going in without permission? And then if you have a data center, same kind of thing. Should they be allowed in? What are the policies and rules about that? Is there an alternate location? Like, do you have a backup data center? I know many people who have a data center down here in Florida also have a backup somewhere else. So just when you're thinking of security and the physical security, make sure you're also considering your data centers in that. So, any thoughts, comments on this one?
I would just add, this is Sam, Elizabeth, I would just add that everybody should be tracking, obviously, the CDC statements. We're learning a lot more about the virus on a daily basis. The CDC releases their updates historically on a two-week cycle, but obviously that is no longer the case with the rapid development of the pandemic. So monitoring their site for updates on what are acceptable cleaning methods, what cleaners and chemicals are effective, the ability of the virus to remain viable on on surfaces. All of these things are important factors that will influence the answers to these questions. But until we have definitive data and that has been validated, it's obvious. The recommendations that we're going with when I speak to other business leaders are just to minimize everything, lock down food service, and really to make the decisions on who the essential staff are and where they need to be, and then put the proper controls in place to protect them as well as others.
That's a really interesting point, Sam. On BBC Global World News, they were interviewing a bunch of programmers out of Europe, and they were connecting the dots between the governments, the municipalities, and getting down to the people to share common information. So to your point, CDC, one vehicle to look at from what's going on a country by country basis, or even a country by, but really actually as a company, what do we know? And that's a really important point, is do we know everything we need to know? Do we need to be aware of everything? I mean, I'm not blowing it out of proportion, but I feel like we need to be more informed, and, you know, the information, it can't necessarily just be coming from network TV programs, but there has to be some sort of a local country, and also learning from other countries as well. You know, I feel like there's probably some opportunity to tap into some of those kinds of sources to be more informed, in addition to the CDC, but also, you know, connecting the dots. So some folks in Europe have started that, and they're encouraging folks around the world to say, okay, so now connect between the various groups. So, you know, like Nextdoor is one app that we use to see what's going on in the Jupiter area. And you can also be informed by people, and it's not even taking advantage of social media to that extent, but maybe there's another means of getting to the network and tapping into a bigger ecosystem with more informed information.
So Terry, I think that's a great point. I know one of the things that we instituted, and this is more around work, but what we do is we have a daily meeting with leaders around the world, being a global company, and they all give input on what's happening in their regions and or countries. And it's really good to get information as different countries do things differently, and to learn from it. And sometimes we put in an overall policy across it, you know, if somebody has a best practice, and that we learn from that. So that's what we've been doing, and that's been very helpful every day to have that meeting.
Yep. Very good. So we do have one question from Faith. What about severe long-term global impacts? I know, you know, just based on some of the news reports I've heard, and we can kind of think of, well, first of all, I'll start with some of the news reports are like, hey, you know, we'll be back to normal by Easter or whatever. And you know, while I hope that is the case, I think if we look to what's, you know, this started in China, things are getting better in China, but they're not back to where they need to be. And so if we look at that as an example, we are in, you know, a more long-term challenge that we're going to have to deal with, and we have to plan for that. So, you know, the global impacts are just, you know, overall, you know, we're going to see, you know, the global economy having an impact, and how are we going to deal with that? How are we going to handle that? You know, as Sam had mentioned earlier, you know, it's an opportunity for many of us who are able to, continue making sure business runs, to help move things along. But there is going to be an impact. There is going to be, challenges that we're going to have to face. Some businesses are going to lose contracts. Some businesses are going to go out of business. So as we're thinking about our own business, what do we need to do to be best positioned for a long-term challenging time frame where it is going to be a challenge. And I don't know how else to put that. It's hard to know exactly what's going to be happening, but we know that there are going to be challenges coming. Any other thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think something prompted there where, getting access to information is going to be critical, besides who's having access to it. So physical security is going to be a challenge, because today you're accessing a lot of stuff within your firewall. Now folks are out, and can they VPN? But getting access to that information, and who has access to that. So, in terms of the security consideration, it's probably, and I'm just being presumptuous, is the hackers are out there right now thinking that folks are working from home, so there's an open field. So maybe security measures could be increased in that space, and just create some sense of awareness as well, because like you hear the stories that don't work from Starbucks because they can hack straight into your computer. The working from home might be just as big an opportunity as well, just a sense of awareness.
So that's a good point, Terry. We have an assumption that our home network is more secure than the Starbucks, but maybe it's not. So again, that's where your help desk and whether or not they can help your employees secure their home network to make sure that everything's okay there. That's a good comment.
So, and there is with that too on security, you should have a policy or be developing one, looking across all of your applications with important data, and make sure that your employees are using a VPN no matter what when they're accessing that data. And that should be a policy that you're out there and you have communicating every communication channel, just to make sure that, again, your data stays safe. Security is a big deal right now.
Yeah.
Yep. So I think we can jump to open forum. So let me see if I can open up everybody to contribute and manage participants and unmute all. So at the moment we have Elizabeth, myself, Jason, Alberto, Faith, Ty, Becky, Michelle, Sam, and Sheila. So I guess in the spirit of, we've got a good 5 minutes. Any questions that were not addressed? Any points of view that anyone is willing to share? Confirmation that this was useful, number one, and also any input into what would complement this even further.
Hi, Terry. This is Sam again. Thank you to the board and to the whole group for hosting the meeting. One additional thing that I would add as leaders in your organizations, I would encourage I would encourage folks to think about the things that we're not naturally thinking about right now. Specifically, how are things going to progress, and to get your management teams together in some way and do a tabletop exercise, a virtual tabletop exercise, to talk through and brainstorm the different possible vectors that this could take, both globally, but specifically for your organization. And then, put that out there as, refine those and think about those in terms of the different directions that this could evolve, so that people are all thinking about those possibilities with every development each day. And that's going to position the team to be thinking from a solutions standpoint rather than reacting to developments, because these developments are already something that you've discussed, that you've spoken about. Perhaps it might not track directly to what you've discussed, but in most cases, an intelligent group of people brainstorming can come up with a pretty broad array of scenarios. And those scenarios, having them documented, having them out there, having them as something that the team has already discussed, gets you past that immediate reaction recoil when they actually come to fruition. And it allows people to go into innovation and problem solving mode a lot faster. So I would just add it's something that most people aren't thinking about when you're in continuity and survival mode, but you can't stop planning a few steps ahead just because you're in reaction mode. So that's
Excellent.
what I would add.
Okay, great. Thanks, Sam. We got that. And good points. Innovation. Think ahead. Anybody else have any other questions? I know we've got about 2 or 3 minutes left.
So I see Alberto posted an article to the comments regarding a mobile device as an endpoint. It's a very valid point. For anyone who has been responsible for endpoint management tool or project, you know that you have to consider all endpoints, you know, printers, copiers, anything that connects, you know, Internet of Things devices. So if somebody brings a Alexa into the office, now that's an endpoint that you have to consider. So when you're thinking about security, do think about all the endpoints that you could have connecting to your network, and make some decisions about what's okay to connect and what's not okay to connect.
Excellent. We'll make this available to the attendees. Any other questions, comments, statements? No.
All right.
Cool. We've got 1 minute to go, and I guess we'll get this recorded, and we'll maybe make some notes and send out the slide deck in a PDF format for those folks that attended. And I guess, Elizabeth, what I'd like to say is thanks everybody for attending and making this interactive as possible.
Yeah, I really appreciate everybody's participation. It made it more interesting than just me sitting here talking.
That's pretty cool.
Awesome. Okay, now you can let your kids shout in the background.
Yeah. I'm like texting my husband. They need to be quiet.
I was doing the wave to my wife. Stop banging on the wall.
All right. So thanks, everyone. And as Terry mentioned, we'll get a copy of the recording out.